So the presentation is called How Can Communities Take Legal Action in Response to Climate Change Implicated Public Health Crises? It's entirely my fault that the name is so long. I'm sorry. It's not pithy, but it is meant to draw in the amazing range of experience we have here today. Folks working in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the region on important public health and climate change issues. So if you will bear with us for the long title, we will get to these four great panelists who, as I said, have a range of great experience. Many of us are in Minnesota. Some of us work across the country, and some of us have deep experience in such things as tribal governance. So it's just great to have everybody here today. This has been a great symposium, and we're excited to be part of it. First of all, we have Elizabeth Royal, who's here as her to share her experience working with the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute. She is 2023's Minnesota Attorney of the Year for her case Epney versus City of Minneapolis, where Epney defended itself against the Roof Depot destruction and the arsenikification of their neighborhood, if I may coin a term. She's also a former tribal judge for the Red Lake Nation, and she has deep experience working with the American Indian movement and representing tribal governments. Evan Mulholland is at the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, where he focuses on healthy communities work, which is partnering with community groups, making progress on environmental justice. He works both on strategic litigation closely with community as well as policy development, and hopefully he'll have time to talk about both of those. Formerly, he was an assistant attorney general in New Hampshire, and he worked with the Compliance Bureau as chief of the Air Resources Division in the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So if there are any difficult questions about air pollution, we've got that covered. Jill Krueger not only is an impressive and wonderful person, she actually sent me a slide that I could use for her. So different format, but Jill's slide here, she's the Director of Climate and Health at the Network for Public Health Law. She works with Betsy, who was in our last presentation, and Jill has a long set of experience working in public health with a lot of knowledge about agricultural issues. And much like myself, she graduated from the University of Iowa. So go Hawks if you're into that sort of thing. And then Mike Wiggins, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. Mike is currently working with the Madeline Island Museum and Wisconsin Historical Society, but previously he was the tribal chairman of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, for 12 years, and during that time, the tribe addressed such important issues as CAFOs, mining issues, oil pipelines, like what Philomena was talking about, and other things like water quality issues. He is both an experienced natural resource manager working with Glyphwick, and he also has overseen public health policy for the tribe, specifically with alcohol and tobacco and drug prevention policies for the tribe. So deep experience, and we thank him for coming and joining us for this. I am Hudson Kingston. I'm legal director at CURE, and if you have not heard of CURE, we are a rural environmental organization focusing on energy democracy and community resilience. We used to be called Clean Up the River Environment, but just CURE now, so the nonprofit formerly known as. And just to launch right in, I think that our panel today is a hard pivot towards environmental justice. Not that other people weren't talking about that in all of the presentations coming along, but just a quick primer on what I mean when I say environmental justice. This is a movement that started around the 1960s by primarily Black civil rights leaders in the South. They often were fighting hazardous waste facilities in places like Georgia and North Carolina. And they created a brand new thing under the sun, which is to fight for the community against large industrial projects that were planned for them. This did really start in rural areas where we were dumping all of our hazardous waste, and it has continued to this day. But that's not to say that it hasn't also developed and been something in rural and urban areas in Minnesota. Specifically, anyone who was in Minnesota in the 1970s would remember the power line fight, which was national news, and it was a fight over a power line that was from a North Dakota coal plant to the Twin Cities to supply electricity to urban people there. The book that was written about it by Paul Wellstone and Barry Casper is a definitive piece on the first battle of America's energy war, and it really is just an amazing piece of reportage, and they went out and actually worked in community and recorded what people thought and the suggestions they had. And it really shows how we've gotten to where we are in energy regulation in the state of Minnesota, but it's also very much a tale of how resistance to a project can then create policy results and solutions. Whether they're the solutions we want is open to debate, but there is a process here where people rise up against things they don't like, and then politicians try to craft policy solutions to deal with that. And it's happened before, and it's happening again. As I said, that book about the power line was written by Paul Wellstone, who you can see on screen here, with such others as Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, the vice president at the time, and obviously quite a lot of very important environmental justice leaders. This is the only national environmental justice policy we have, which is Executive Order 12898. And it only came about after Paul Wellstone had tried to pass legislation on environmental justice in the 1990s. It is actually about to be the 30-year anniversary of this environmental justice executive order. And to this day, it is still the only law or policy that we have at the federal level that protects communities from environmental racism. So pat yourself on the back if you voted for Paul Wellstone. I miss him, and we all should know our history from that. But moving much more up to today, I think one context that I would like to use for our presentation, which is gleaned from the North Carolina Climate Justice Collective, is the 4 R's of environmental climate justice. So the 4 R's being reform, working with the system; resist, working against the system; reimagining, envisioning a new system; and recreating, which is creating models for a just new system. Perhaps it's a simple framework, but I think it's a really great framework, and I was excited to find it and share it with you all today. So with all of that, all of those Zoom problems I created behind us now, please put questions that you have in the chat. And I am just going to start out with my initial questions for the speakers, and maybe we'll go one after the other because it's hard for people to talk at the same time on Zoom. But let's start with that first question. How has your work incorporated any of the 4 R's of social transformation? And I will stop sharing so that we can see more than one person at a time. So yes, let's say Liz, how have the 4 R's been part of your work, or how have you gone beyond the 4 R's?
Well, my work is really in working within the legal system. That's how we started with a lawsuit against the city of Minneapolis, who would not engage in any discussions in regards to the roof depot demolition plans and their plan to build the Hiawatha expansion project and move the most undesirable elements of that into this neighborhood, which is a low-income neighborhood that has a lot of immigrants and a lot of native people living there. Little Earth is right next to Little Earth of the United Tribes. The residential area is right next to it, and so we started the lawsuit and worked within the system, but we also tried to imagine and reimagine what could happen there in this space. And we didn't just say that we don't want you to demolish this and expose this neighborhood to arson. We went further than that. We said we want this space and we want to create something positive. here in this space. And that really resonated with the neighborhood. And we were able to motivate the neighborhood to come out and to support the lawsuit, to stand in front of the courthouse and to demonstrate. And I think this is how we were able to resist the city in doing what it wanted to do, and to reimagine what could be there, and also to build something, to create something completely new that is going to be useful and that is going to benefit the community.
Wonderful, Liz. And I know that you had success with your lawsuit, obviously as Attorney of the Year. But did you also, well, success of a sort.
No, Hudson.
But what
We
about
didn't have
other?
much success. Yes, we
Yeah,
didn't have not much success with the lawsuit. We were losing. We were losing pretty much everywhere we filed, but that didn't stop us from coming up with new claims, with new appeals, and with encouraging the community to go and vote for the city council members that are going to be supportive of what the community wants. And so the makeup of the city council changed. We were able to persuade the legislature through a lot of work with the legislature to help persuade the city to sell the land to my client, EP&I. So we were able to be successful by implementing a lot of different strategies.
awesome, awesome. Yeah. How about you, Evan? Have you seen resistance, reimagination? What works in the fights that you've been a part of or learned from?
Well, I've learned a lot from Liz, and I really appreciate this framework here that you put together, Hudson. I've so much I want to say. I just want to say a couple things because I want to let everyone else talk. Reimagining really struck a chord with me. Traditionally we think about attorneys being like the leader, and like we come up with the ideas and the lawsuit, and we're like moving forward, we're the point. In order to do what we want to do and have the world we want to live in, I've found that the coalition work I've been involved in requires us to like reconsider our role and realize that we're actually interdependent on each other and that we rely on each other, both, inside a campaign, inside a coalition, and then really in society itself. And I think that if we want the different world that we're talking about with these 3 R's, we have to practice it, like in our work, the way we live. We have to practice respect and open-mindedness, and have the ideas can come from anywhere within the coalition. So the other one I want to mention is just a big area of reform within the system that is amazing that we accomplished within the Frontline Communities Protection Coalition, of which MCA is a member, is the cumulative impact law that the Minnesota legislature and the governor signed this past spring. Cumulative impacts is a structural problem across the country. This is the problem where you've got all sorts of industrial pollution, background pollution, and the social determinants of health all intersecting and interacting sort of as a result of intentional and systemic racism in our society, like we were hearing about earlier today. Environmental permitting, classic environmental permitting, almost ignores almost every aspect of what's around the individual point source, for instance, in air pollution. And it doesn't look at the vulnerabilities in the neighborhood. It doesn't look at the background levels of pollution of the different toxics. It just looks at, what are we going to permit right here? And that's why for communities, people who live nearby this or inside a cumulative impact problem, this law is like a game changer. And we're still in the rulemaking process. It's going to be another 2.5 years of rulemaking, which is another thing we can talk about. But what it really means at the bottom line is for the first time, we could require existing polluters to limit pollution upon permit renewal or permit amendment, or when new polluters want to come into a place with excess pollution already, disproportionate impact, permit would be denied. So this is really big, and it's an example of reform of one of the R's, moving within the system to change the laws.
Great. And we definitely will come back to the cumulative impacts rulemaking if we can, because I think it touches on so many of the things that we'll all be talking about. Jill, I know that you work across the country, and much like Betsy, you are able to provide technical assistance to communities, and you are not always filing lawsuits yourself. So how do the 4 Rs of this climate justice framework speak to your work and your experience?
Thanks, Hudson. I'm really happy to be here. And that's right. Litigation is not our main tool at the Network for Public Health Law. We're typically providing what we call legal technical assistance, which falls a bit short, not falls short, but stays on one side of the line without veering into legal advice. We also provide legal resources and do a lot of kind of collaborative brainstorming, problem solving, strategizing with our partners. And a lot of it, yeah, I like this continuum. I mean, when I think about sort of reform efforts, I think about work that, a lot of our partners, whether it's the Medical Societies Consortium for Climate and Health, or the U.S. Climate and Health Alliance, have really focused on renewable energy standards and that gradual transition from fossil fuels. And that's a reform effort. And one of the legal tools that we bring to that work is policy surveillance, where we're really looking, scanning across the country, looking at what laws are being passed, analyzing the terms of those laws so that we can compare them from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and then look at the results and health outcomes in the jurisdictions with those differing laws and compare them so that advocates in the various states can say, we want a law like Minnesota just passed because it has these features and these, which has been associated with better health outcomes. So that's kind of a reform effort. When I think about resistance, I think about a lot of what many of the speakers have already been talking about, the history in this country of slavery, redlining, segregation, and frankly, the threat of climate gentrification, right? We don't want our efforts to price the people who've been living in neighborhoods out of the neighborhoods that they've been living in. So then we want to support those resistance strategies, things like a community benefit ordinance or inclusionary zoning like we have in Minneapolis. When I think about reimagining, I actually think about sort of COVID response work that we've been doing at the network with our public health law partners, like the Public Health Law Center, like the Center for Public Health Law Research, Change Lab Solutions, where we were really responding to the backlash to the exercise of public health authority, but also starting to think, wait, what's the rationale for why public health should have these expansive emergency powers? And how can we talk about that, communicate about that with folks? And really, we started, in lots of conversations with public health officials, with attorneys, with community-based organizations, and state and local coalitions to really hear 3 core values that we can really ground ourselves in. And the things we've been hearing about all day today, again, good governance that's transparent, that's participatory, evidence-based decision-making, not ideologically driven, but based on the evidence or expert opinion. I mean, saying something is evidence-based shouldn't be meant to stifle innovative strategies, but there should be some reason to believe that a strategy is going to work. And then, of course, at the core and foundation is health equity and undoing structural racism. So there's 3 core values: good governance, evidence-based decision-making, health equity, and racial equity. And then recreation, I think we'll spend the rest of the panel talking about, but it means that our goal isn't just reducing emissions in that transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, for example. It means that we want to advance equity and justice as we're doing that, so that we're thinking about, well, where will the jobs be created? How can we locate job training in those frontline communities that have been most affected by, by climate change, by pollution, by particulate matter emissions, as a result of where fossil fuel and industrial facilities have been sited. How can we make sure that all of the grants and tax incentives and low interest loans aren't targeted just at single family homes, but that are, going to affordable housing, going to multifamily housing? How can we promote energy efficiency as a piece of the solution? So those are just sort of some opening comments about that framework, which I think is really useful. And how can we support conversations? At the network, we hosted a climate and health equity summit in the fall of 2022, just to support some of those conversations and bring people from government, from community-based organizations, from academia together to share ideas and see one another as allies and partners.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. And yeah, I should have introduced you to Liz a long time ago. You guys, there's some really good commonalities here. The timing is right. Chairman Wiggins, thank you so much for joining us. Do you your former colleague Philomena did a great job of sort of foreshadowing the fight against Enbridge Line 5, but you just did so much in the time that you were working with the band. What speaks to you in terms of your environmental justice experience or resource management experience? Is it more about resistance or reimagining? I imagine you have a lot of ideas.
Yeah, I would start by saying it was great listening to Philomena. She's an incredible catalyst of change within our community, saving people with her harm reduction efforts. And then she's also a water protector. And that gets me into some of our environmental justice issues that we've been through. You have the 4 R's: resist, reform, reimagine, recreate. And I can think through some of our journeys, resisting some of the destruction that was coming at us through those compartments. But I'll say that when I came in 2009, back as chairman, Governor Scott Walker and the American Legislative Exchange Council Republicans arrived at the state level. They changed mining law to be scientifically unjust, socially unjust, and they slated a huge open pit mine for our headwaters, and ultimately through the USGS science, the groundwater recharge of our reservation home. So it lit up a lot of resistance. On the resistance side of the coin, we subscribe to Dr. Al Gaddick's notion that no matter what happens, we can refuse to give them a social license to operate. And when we approached a mining company, I take that back. We never talked with the mining company. We just refused to grant a social license. And that became the one base of the resistance. The other base was that utilizing our treaty rights, our usufructuary rights within those treaties, the ability to hunt, fish, and gather, and the fact that those usufructuary rights have implied consequences related to habitat, related to ecosystems, related to water and groundwater recharge. We partnered with other Ojibwe tribes in our area, and this harvest camp right up at the epicenter of the open pit mine site was created. And what we did there was we essentially put into spiritual flow the notion of the perpetual harvester. And that harvest camp had harvesting activities at the center, which were treaty rights guaranteed. And it also served as a bit of a baseline data collector for a multitude of environmental indicators up in that area. And it was really, really an incredible rallying point. that gets into reforming and the reformation of how we were approaching things. We utilized who we were as a people, ceremony, our culture, our harvesting, and that whole notion of food security and water security as a way to reform our resistance and start to move in a flow that aligned itself with laws and who we were as people. Previously, in 2007, we had developed water quality standards as a tribe that were based on narratives and storytelling and rooted in protective tiers that dovetailed directly back into our culture and our lifeways. As an example, wild rice waters were a tier 1 highest protective tier that there was. Some of our other areas related to other plants and medicines, related to migratory flyways, related to other types of usufructuary activities and spiritual activities. They were all tiered out with protective statuses based off of who we were. Those are federally recognized, and they give us access points into EPA tables, into Army Corps tables, into state and federal tables. And so we really reformed how we approach things through that lens of who we were as Ojibwe, as an ancient people in their ancestral homeland, and tried to carve out that ability to get legal status and impact the permitting processes. All of that could be called essentially employing what's quote unquote the feather in the pen. The feather being all of those cultural ways and looking worldviews, the pen being the legalese and the permitting processes and the legislative efforts. Employing the feather and the pen as a strategy was very effective for us. So as we reimagined what we were and how we looked at things, we started looking at sustainable economies, local food systems. We started looking at food security. I always think of this Oneida tribal member that said, you can't talk about sovereignty until you can feed your own people. And then in that food sovereign realm, you always hear that there's going to be a crisis. It won't be a food crisis in quantity. It's going to be a food crisis in quality. Same thing goes for water. But water shifts. Water is going to be a food crisis in quality and quantity. And so we looked at how do we reimagine how we integrate with our other communities? How do we reimagine and put into play how we're living on this land so that people understand it's worth protecting in real time. And that got into recreating systems that last our, we developed food sovereignty programs within our tribe. We essentially started looking at renewable energy. We went from energy policy or weak energy policy to a complete renewable energy plan. Went from 0 to 10% of electricity production as a nation. And then we started looking at the health and wellness of our community, because when you're starting to talk about genocidal threats to your water resources, the whole social justice issue starts to flare up along the lines of poison, toxicity, cancer, all of those health impacts that would come out of open pit mining, that would come out of the arrival of CAFOs I want to be mindful of the fact that some of you are from Iowa, but concentrated animal feeding operations are absolutely part of a resource extractive economy and a resource extraction element. And the one that we resisted up here would have meant about would have been 22,000 hogs and an additional 10 million gallons of raw sewage on a landscape in the Lake Superior drainage basin. And we're connected to that with our whole northern border. So when you look at recreating systems, it was trying to remind folks that in real time, we have tourism, we have local sustainable economy, we are water rich, we have powerful local food systems that are super high in quality, and again, trying to celebrate that as we move forward. So in our neck of the woods, I would just say to the listeners that One strategy may be to develop a working relationship with a sovereign nation, an indigenous sovereign nation. There's treaty rights. With that is trust responsibility. There's usually within the Ojibwe realm of northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, Michigan, there are usufructuary rights and things like that that come with those treaties. And in there is the implication and the absolute common sense baseline that you're going to need healthy ecosystems for these treaty rights to exist. And most of us are crafted up with that notion that we shall not be deprived of our homes. I remember saying one time to a group of non-tribal people, I wish you had a treaty with your government. And so there's some power in partnering with indigenous communities. And the other part about recreating is it gave us the ability to really get at baseline data collections. The baseline data helps us get into determining and talking about cumulative impacts later on in permitting processes. And that whole notion of characterizing our water, the early efforts of resistance across our region, I think, created a higher consciousness. When CAFOs arrived after the mining, there was a ton of communities across the area that lit up on that, not just the tribes. When a privatization or water effort came, similar to Nestle stealing groundwater aquifers across the UP, our whole region around Chequamegon Bay, Lake Superior, Apostle Islands lit up and said no to that. There is definitely momentum and consciousness raising that comes with resistance and comes with starting to learn about your groundwater characterizations, starting to learn about how the land and the earthen processes work for the web of creation. And so yeah, I'll stop there and just say that's a quick hit on some of the stuff we went through.
Yeah, so many things I want to follow up on. Evan, jump in.
Yeah, Hudson, and thank you, Mike. I just want to follow up. There was something I wanted to say, which is very similar to what you were just saying, is how powerful it is when you can combine legal action with collective power. Like, and that's what I was going to say about the resist R, is that when you have both together and both are developing and people see that they're interrelated and they're going to start showing up, the window of what's possible shifts so much. And we saw that with what Liz and the Epney fight over the roof depot. The window of possible policy actions changes. It changes because of collective power pushing on policymakers and decision makers. You know, you need both.
I completely agree. And what I found, what I was amazed at when we started battling this mining application, I was amazed at how many elders had been at this for 50 years. With a variety of previous really bad environmentally impactful ideas in the name of profit. But to that end, along with these water protector like heroes that rose up around me and through the other tribes, came the arrival of some of those groups like the National Wildlife Federation, the Sierra Club, Wisconsin Wildlife Federation, the Wisconsin Wetlands Association. What's really amazing there when I talk about developing relationships is those folks and those groups have been at it a long time too, and they came with their own data sets, they came with their own narratives and stories and ability to recraft how we look at our home. And so there's a lot of help out there. I'm always encouraged by that. There's an incredible amount of help out there, people-wise. And in a different conversation, I'd tell you there's a lot of help out there spirit-wise too, from the creator and how this place is put together. The indigenous people have been around for thousands of years on this landscape, and there's a lot of power here. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
One thing I wanted to follow up with is, you mentioned treaty rights and the usufructuary rights. And one thing I learned from talking to folks at Fond du Lac in the context of Manoomin or wild rice is the idea that it's not the right to have the bare minimum, right? So you're talking about clean water. And I just wanted to follow up on sort of your concept of what clean water is, or what a livable environment is for the tribe. When you have a right, it's not to like a deer, or a barely their resource, especially when you're dealing with a living ecosystem that is protected by law. So I wanted to pitch that weird question to you if I could.
That takes me into a little bit of detail. There's a lot of ways to answer that, but I'll answer it this way. What makes water quality important? Where do we want to be? Wild rice has a 10 milligram threshold for sulfides in Minnesota. There's been a tremendous amount of mining company litigation effort at trying to move that standard. And so whatever standard they would move it to, their whole operation would tell you in a permitting process that they're only going to pollute to that much. And so as one way of approaching the attacks on numerical standards for water quality, it gets back into how we crafted our water quality standards, which are based in narratives and based in storytelling concepts of how we identify with our place. Numeric standards are actually a potential doorway for extractive industry to attack and ultimately justify their actions. And so we have an anti-degradation kind of rule attached to our top tier of protection, meaning we are impacted. Yous are all impacted. The earth has been diminished. Now, it's still enough and it's still beautiful. Mother Earth is still unbelievable and life-giving. But we're at that point where enough is enough in terms of some of these really large resource extractive efforts that destroy Earth's ability to replenish. Metallic mineral mining does that in that particular place. And for those of you listening today from Hamline and right up by Lake Mille Lacs, Tamarack, Minnesota, there's a massive nickel mine, metallic mineral mining operation planned up there that's going to destroy hydrology. It's going to destroy groundwater conductivity. And that's just the way it is. The North Shore is that way. Now, it's a long debate. Life has to exist for human beings and all of that. But again, we're at a point where when we talk about groundwater conductivity and you look at Lake Superior as the fastest warming big lake in the Great Lakes, there are some things where we have to really be wise about, in terms of leaving, I'll say, ecosystem breadcrumb trails for the future. Protecting these areas and standing up for them is important. And so that whole notion of numeric standards and how we approached them in narrative form is one way to get at that anti-degradation. And that becomes the premise for baseline data and cumulative impacts. It's about we're at a threshold where there's no more rivers and lakes to sacrifice.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I know I speak for Betsy Lawton, who knows even more about the Clean Water Act than me, that was great. And I'm sorry to everybody who doesn't know a lot about the Clean Water Act, but thank you so much, Chairman. So folks, maybe raise your hand if you want to go at this first. But one of the questions I had in mind was how can either the public health, structures that we've heard about in the earlier presentations, or how can individuals who are not currently in the fight show up for climate impacted communities? How can they show up for your community, or how have you seen good examples of communities enlisting that additional help or changing the discussion with their public health authorities? I see Evan's hands up.
Thanks, Hudson. I've been thinking about this a lot over the past 2 years. And for us, as a mainly white-led 50-year-old environmental organization that's working in environmental justice, it takes time and it takes presence to form relationships. Like you can't just swoop in and say, okay, we're here, like we're going to solve the problem. So what I encourage myself and my colleagues to do is to go to events, show up, learn about what's going on in different neighborhoods in different parts of the state, and and then speak out. First listen, hear things, really understand as best you can, and then speak out about how our extractive capitalist system has resulted in these sacrifice zones and environmental injustice. And the hyperconsumption, that problem that we have, and just the lack of care and the lack of connection. And by being there and forming relationships and showing up for things that don't even really have to do with your work. That's what I encourage. I'll stop.
Liz, what do you think?
I would second what Evan is saying in regards to relationships. You have to build relationships with organizations that are educating and that have the capacity to file a lawsuit, to lobby the legislature. You have to become one voice among many in order to push policy and to push things in a different direction.
Jill, I see you have your hand up too.
Thanks, Hudson. Let me lower my hand. I just wanted to circle back to the commentary about the dearth of federal law related to environmental justice, and just circle back to something Joelle had said at the outset of the day's presentations, that state law is really, really critical for public health law. And so wanted to lift up Washington State has what they call their HEAL Act, which is focused on health equity. And it's really, I really recommend people study up on it. It really has kind of a whole of government approach. It's a coordinated approach, bringing together 7 state agencies. And I think that number may have grown since I last looked at it, but they're incorporating environmental justice into their agency, their state agency strategic plans, into their community engagement strategies. They have an equal justice council, an environmental justice council at the state level. And then in terms of what they're concretely doing, in the state statute, in that HEAL Act, they focus on targeting expenditures on overburdened communities, so that 40% of climate change and environmental justice funding or environmental funding should be targeted or directed toward those overburdened communities. And how do they know which are the overburdened communities? The law requires them to maintain an environmental health disparities map and update that using tools of public health like surveillance and epidemiology. So I do want to lift up that sometimes the states are the laboratories of democracy, as we hear in law school, going back to Brandeis. And then there's a couple other things I wanted to share, but I could save those for the next time I come up.
No, I mean, Jill, go ahead. I think you have a lot of useful examples from both inside and outside the Midwest, and definitely, yeah, go run with it.
Okay, well, just 2 quick things. One, I put in the chat a link to a blog post that Betsy had written after the terrible U.S. Supreme Court decision in Sackett v. EPA about the Clean Water Act and its application or lack of application to wetlands, and really appreciated, Mike, your comments. And, we've long been at the network, admirers of the tribal climate adaptation menu that, Glyph-Wick and others, many tribal partners produced. And just, the role of natural solutions. For example, that tribal climate adaptation menu is one of my favorite things is a discussion of the role of beavers and, the importance of wildlife habitat to water quality. So just wanted to lift that up. And then the third thing I just wanted to say, that's my last thing. Betsy had mentioned that I had some comments I could share about mental health. As an aspect of responding to climate change, just as both sort of the general population and then those who work on climate change and environmental justice, sort of the mental health toll of the difficulty, when you really look at the data, there is a mental health toll. But we've got some great leadership right here in Minnesota. And I can put some links in the chat, but just wanted to lift up that there's a professor at the College of St. Scholastica. Well, she has a dual appointment, College of St. Scholastica and the White Earth Tribal and Community College, Leah Prussia, has been doing some fantastic work, sort of linking, sort of Western psychology and Anishinaabe teachings for supporting mental health with respect to climate change. And Leah Prussia has worked with Christy Manning at McAllister, Brenda Hoppy, who was at Minnesota Department of Health. They've surveyed therapists, asking them, like, do you have the tool? Are your patient clients asking about mental health? Do you have the tools to help them? Are your clients asking about climate change or raising concerns about climate change? And do you feel you have the tools to help your clients with those? So some really fascinating and important work coming out of right here in Minnesota. So I'll put some links to that in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. I see we have a question. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Yep.
I was just going to say really quick too. One other thing about mental health, and I'll also add in just the umbrella of poverty. In our resistance and litigation now with Enbridge, an oil pipeline company, it's very, very disheartening to see their tactics on our community, on our sovereign nation. Since the Tribal Council, as a responsible government, isn't giving them what they want, their community communications and community outreach arm of their corporation is infiltrating our community person by person, promising big money, promising the notion of per cap payouts, which is just free money every year or every month. When you look at the social justice framework of how that's working, it's really, really sickening. In terms of what they're doing to our community. So how that plays out is Enbridge has shifted their tactic to push for a referendum. As why shouldn't every tribal member vote on this ecologically genocidal, complex environmental issue? Why shouldn't everybody that needs money, why shouldn't they have a right to vote on this issue? Maybe their need for money in their wallet will override governmental concerns. That's some sarcasm there, but at the end of the day, that is part of how these things play out on our communities too, which impacts mental health. It impacts the very core of our identity, how we relate to our home, and puts us in a over a barrel, and puts people over a barrel against each other in the micro. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, that's really important, Mike. I mean, the bribes and manipulation that the oil industry is using as it doesn't get what it wants is really important in our region. And it Line 5 crosses so many states. They've pushed so hard in Michigan to get their one segment that's about to explode in the lake replaced, and the state isn't having it, so they're pushing everything they can. Liz, that made me think about your dealings with the great city of Minneapolis. Not to slander or libel anyone, because obviously we wouldn't do that. What sort of strategies did they use to try to discredit EPNI? What sort of spin, I guess, did they spin to try to say that they weren't the bad guys here?
They basically said that the environmental impact of their plant undertaking would be negligible. They hired experts to deliver opinions to the court, saying that there really was no more pollution going to result from the destruction of the roof depot and the operation and the construction of their expansion project and the operation of it. It was not going to have a significant environmental impact on the community. And these hired guns, they cost $65,000-$70,000. And we didn't have that kind of money to match. So we were relying on academics that wrote honest opinions pro bono, and they were our academics were not untruthful. They said this may cause great harm. It will cause some harm, but right now it's going to be difficult to assess. So the court sided with the experts that were giving a definite opinion about it not being harmful to the community. And those are tactics where you can really outspend a small nonprofit, you know, in getting the opinion that they want. The mayor was also going in front of the media all the time, telling basically saying that, well, the city needs clean water, and we need to provide, as a municipality, it is our duty to provide clean water, and we need this to provide clean water, and it's not going to cause any more pollution, and you got to weigh the cost benefit, and none of it was true. Because there are no water pipes, there is no water going in and out of that facility. It is just a maintenance facility where they wanted to park 888 new vehicles, including heavy diesel machinery. So, you know, those were the tactics where they wanted to whitewash the environmental impact. And we didn't even get to getting an EIS done. You know, they simply the court sided with them that an environmental worksheet was sufficient. And you know, we had thousands of comments on and the most comments ever on an EAW here in the city, saying that it's defective. But unfortunately, the courts didn't see it that way and didn't listen to the people, and sided with a few experts that were what in our jargon, in the legal jargon, are called hired guns.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, you know, comparing, as I have now, Enbridge to the city of Minneapolis sort of highlights that power doesn't give up just because they initially don't get what they want. As much as environmental justice people have to think about using multiple tactics at once, they also have to be ready to be met with multiple tactics at once, and obviously a lot of well-funded tactics. I see Evan's got his hand.
I'm here feeling the same thing, Liz, when MCA is part of the Zero Burn, Zero Waste Coalition to try to shut the HERC in Minneapolis, the incinerator that burns all our trash and is an enormous polluter in North Minneapolis. And the message from the county is, hey, yeah, it's fine. There's a lot of other sources of pollution. It's probably the cars that are making you sick. So we don't have to shut the HERC. And it just ignores the cumulative impact problem. Like if you have too much pollution in an area, especially when people are marginalized and already have like the social determinants of health that are making people sicker, you got to do what you can. And if we can shut the HERC, we should. And it's just like the propaganda from the county is heavy. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should linger on the HERC a little bit. So the HERC is the largest trash burning facility in Minnesota. It's in downtown Minneapolis, near North Minneapolis, where there are disproportionate climate and pollution impacts. And as Jamie Long said in his presentation, burning anything in your house ain't good for you, and yet we burn just garbage in one of the most populated parts of our biggest city. And I wouldn't be for it if it was in a rural area either, to be clear. But yeah, what are your thoughts, I guess, Evan, on the No Burn Coalition and the idea that we should use waste that people are throwing away anyway to make energy? Is waste to energy something we're stuck with for the rest of our lives because we are always going to consume stuff and we're just stuck with that? Or is there a better way to deal with the waste problem that's a little more wraparound than just burning stuff you don't have use for anymore?
Thanks, Hudson. I'll just summarize really quickly. the idea that we should continually consume as much as possible, take all of our trash, put it in trucks, bring it to North Minneapolis, put it in a giant, whatever it's called, a giant, machine, douse it with thousands of cubic feet of natural gas, frack gas, light it on fire. It's not a climate solution. And anyone who says that is misguided. So what we're doing with the coalition is trying to really recreate and reimagine the waste system. Like a lot of what goes into the HERC currently is compostable and recyclable. And on top of that, the HERC doesn't solve the landfill problem because it ends up with a lot of ash that is landfilled currently, about 30%. So if we can just shift the system, we end up with a much more sustainable waste system, compost, recycling, reduction, and then we don't have to light it all on fire in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems really straightforward to me, and we're hitting so much friction. It is so hard to get this done, and it's going to be a long campaign, but we're not going to give up.
Yeah. And just as a fun fact, I requested all the ash data because they test that ash. It's absolutely the most terrifying stuff in the world. And we're producing it every day in Minnesota and bringing it to sites that are sometimes lined and sometimes not lined. Liz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I almost forgot. Another tactic employed by the city was bashing demonstrators, going so far as to criminally charge them for trespass and so on when they demonstrated in front of city council. So that was a big bashing. Another one, another tactic was and this is really stifling a lot of litigation, is that defendants are asking for incredibly high bonds. And there is a Minnesota law that says that they're entitled to bond. And I wrote a little paper on it that I provided for the symposium together with a law student to underline how important it is that we get reasonable bonds that small nonprofits can afford to pay, and that the ability to pay a bond needs to be considered by the judge handling these injunctive relief motions.
Absolutely. Liz, real quick, why does that law let Minneapolis say that you have to post a huge bond? How is it calculated in theory?
Well, in theory, it is calculated by saying, okay, if you are bringing a lawsuit against somebody and you're going to lose this lawsuit and you're going to get an injunction stopping them from demolition and developing their project, they're going to have costs associated with that. And they should not unjustifiably be charged with these costs. Therefore, you need to place bonds. So if you lose and you brought this lawsuit erroneously or without merit, they need to have some sort of security that their costs are being covered.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful, Liz. I mean, MIRA, the law that Liz is talking about, is an incredibly important law, but if someone brought a MIRA lawsuit against an oil pipeline, the oil pipeline could say, we make a profit of $100 million a day, so your bond is going to have to cover that. And nobody can cover that, unless it was another oil pipeline company.
Right, and my argument is that we have a constitutional right to water, clean soil, and clean air, and that overwrites any of these rights to a cost bond when the harm is irreversible.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. That's a really concrete example about how we could change a law to make it better, or it could be interpreted by courts to make it better for the environment and for community. We did have a question from Fiona, which I would ask Jacqueline to unmute and read Fiona's question about sustainability accounting. And after Jacqueline reads that out for us, I just broadly, like what new policies are happening, you know, Justice 40 at the federal level or cumulative impacts at the state level. What gives y'all hope in terms of reimagining or recreating the system? I don't know. Oh, there's Jacqueline. Yeah, so let's start with Fiona's question.
Yeah, so it looks like Fiona's asking, how much will new sustainability and accounting and reporting requirements assist with compliance towards environmental justice initiatives? Assuming that we have new GRI standards on biodiversity and consolidation of standards with SBTI, others, these issues will eventually be helpful unless there will still be skirting of impacts.
Anyone want to take that one? Okay, I think Jacqueline is talking about, or sorry, Fiona is talking about, you know, accounting for environmental impacts in new ways under new regimes that are just sort of getting off the grounds now. So I'd just like to ramp off of this great question by Fiona and say, what, you know, are you excited about, you know, new SEC reporting on climate change impacts, or are you excited about the Justice 40 initiative? What brings you hope in this movement that, you know, as we see climate change is getting worse, what policy-wise maybe is getting better? What is coming down the pike that is still getting you out of bed in the morning? Anybody want to try that one?
Yeah, it's actually not related to maybe environmental policy yet, but it will be. In Wisconsin, when in 2009, when Walker and the Republicans came in, they attacked collective bargaining, the unions. They passed the terrible mining law. They instituted essentially an assault on a lot of progressive Wisconsin historics, and one of them was that they redrew the voting maps, and they as they call it, they gerrymandered the voting maps to give themselves just this ironclad majority win, even when the majority of voters were voting Democratic in Wisconsin. There was just no way to touch the Republican legislature. That has been litigated, and there are new maps being redrawn that are giving people a chance at democracy once again. And you know, the elephant in the corner is fascism when we talk about a lot of these processes, fascisms and that kowtowing to corporations. And but to that end, I always keep in mind Citizens United that attached life to some of these corporations, and we need to go after them along those lines, because they definitely have a spirit of greed and excess attached to them. So the redrawing of voting maps in Wisconsin is going to have beautiful outcomes, and that gives me a lot of optimism now for the greater state, and we'll see some democracy.
Awesome, thank you, Liz.
What gives me hope really are the young people, the new generation, and I feel that their capacity to love is much greater than to hate, and I think they are much more involved in trying to protect the earth, because they have experienced the earth's rebellion against what we've been doing to it. And so I think that gives me hope. And just another thing that was on the news recently is that Biden hits pause on the approval of the liquefied natural gas exports. I think that is going to be a real important piece of policy that is going to hopefully have a great impact on our future and on fracking and so forth. So I hope I have a lot of hope for this. So that's that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, Liz. I think that's another example of you know, people who are working really deep in legal policy and advocacy and policy in connection with this movement that we're talking about across the country of young people. I love the millennials coming together to like, and even younger, are coming together to like see the intersection and sort of the way all of these fights are sort of the same fight. Like, are we going to devolve into fascism or not? Are we going to stop extractive, greedy corporations or not? Like, this is the question that we've got to answer. And that's why I get up every morning, because I get to work with people who are trying to fix it together.
Awesome. Jill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this notion of states as the laboratories of democracy. We're doing some new legislative tracking that we've not done before at the network this year, just to see, you know, so that we can see great laws like the HEAL Act in Washington State and, you know, get the word out about them so other states can consider them. That we're seeing, I mean, you know, local governments really stepping up. I mean, there's an initiative called cityhealth.org where cities are competing to adopt the strongest, most protective laws of public health, and they've added green space as one of the measures. They started with 9 core evidence-based sort of health promoting policies, and some of them tangentially related to climate change, like food procurement, et cetera. But they've added green space, which is such a core climate change intervention, and the idea that cities can compete for medals to best create the conditions for their citizens, for all of their citizens to be healthy. And the green space specifically does, you know, prioritize, again, those communities that have been most affected and burdened by environmental pollution, et cetera, and redlining, which limited access to green space and shade, et cetera. So I think there's lots, you know, we have to look beyond the federal government and look at what states, locals, tribes are doing, and we can find a lot of hope there.
Yeah, awesome. I know that I don't think anyone on this panel is an expert on health insurance or naturopathic medicine, but I did, at the risk of throwing a hand grenade, Chairman Wiggins, do you have anything you'd like to say about the tribe's approach to going beyond healthcare, so treating food as a part of culture and healing and working on issues of public health, but doing it in ways that are not just getting people pills that are made by Pfizer or anything like that? We have a great question from Julie here, but I just would love to hear, you know, from your experience with the tribe, what's the holistic approach to things like food and you know, different forms of knowledge?
Yeah, well, food is medicine, and again, talking about food quality, we know that you know, our food sovereignty system, and we have just an amazing array of the director and the workers there. We're pushing to get traditional foods back into the mouths of our people, looking at ecosystems as the sustainers of what are millennial-based relationships, from maple trees and maple syrup to wild rice in those waters. Our people's bodies still carry the relationship of the foods that are on the landscapes around us, and that includes like wawasheshki, you know, deer meat, venison, as they say. And so our food sovereignty department is pushing to get those back into the mouths of our people. We're doing that through integrating food into our programs and our departments, like Head Start, cafeterias, the elder feeding program. We're doing that by pushing the feds to start integrating traditional foods into commodities. Then the tribes themselves, and this was a COVID kind of blossom, have really started integrating with this intertribal food share, where they're providing food boxes to all the elders across the tribes. That is amazing, and they're really focusing and sending money at small growers, small providers of plants and medicines, things like that. And so we're seeing some really cool. We're seeing some really cool money being sent towards some of these food producers that are that are really mindful and really thinking smaller to be better. So.
Awesome. We do have a question that might be for you as well, Chairman Wiggins. Tess D said, the feather and the pen model is so compelling. Any resource recommendations to learn more about the experience with the mining fight and harvest camp or other examples? Do you have off the top of your head any ideas to learn more about it?
Yeah, well, Glyphwick, I think Philomena may have included a link to glyphwick.org. There's a lot of information there. There's been a couple of books written about some of the resistance efforts. Dr. Patty Lowe, Leow, has a book out about resistance, and more maybe informally or anecdotally. A gentleman by the name of Nick Vanderpie wrote a book about his experience at that harvest camp. The feather and the pen came out of an old Ojibwe ceremony when actually the tribal people in Bad River asked about how to stop how to stop train shipments of sulfuric acid heading to White Pine, Minnesota, that would have crossed our river. And they did the ceremony asking the spirit that, so to speak, and that spirit came back and said, you need to use the feather and the pen, and they got some other instructions about ceremony and things like that. And so that has been kind of a breadcrumb to follow for a lot of our other environmental protection efforts. So
awesome, thank you so much. I did promise everyone that we would talk about cumulative impacts rulemaking with Evan. So I will now promise everyone that Evan and I will do a webinar on that topic at a later date, because we do not have time to talk about rulemaking. I am sorry. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
I'll just say one thing about cumulative impacts. We pushed the EPA Region 5, Dr. Susan Hedman. She was the one that presided over Flint, Michigan's lead pipe stuff. About cumulative impacts, and because of course every large effort's an island unto itself permitting wise. She responded by hosting a big lake summit in Duluth, Minnesota, and they followed that up with another big lake summit up on the Keweenaw Peninsula, trying to, from universities, private groups, the EPA, state, trying to get at some notion of a data set that could be accessible and retrievable, because people have no idea what's going on in other arms of the science-based research, that's taking place. And it's so critical, because as you guys alluded to with the city, these efforts, these profit-based corporate efforts come with pseudoscience. They come with outright lies, and I've watched efforts around here. These companies try to shame like career scientists in our area who are experts on the local ecosystems. It's cutthroat, and so yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Sorry.
Hudson, do we have question? Just for one comment, one quick comment.
Yeah, Liz.
I put it in the comments, but I think what Mike is saying is crucially important, because Native people are disproportionately impacted by disease such as heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and those things are very much linked to bad foods. And a history of reservations being provided with bad food. And if you go onto the reservation, on any reservation today, you will see, and I don't like talking about people in this way, but I think we have to address it. You will see disproportionate number of obese people, and the joke is you can eat the sweets if you sprinkle metformin, which is a diabetes medication, on top of it. Okay, that's a joke coming out of Native country, and it really is a pandemic that Native people are fighting on top of the opioid crisis.
Yeah, and to reiterate, you know, Liz has a long history as a Red Lake tribal judge, which is a closed reservation in northern Minnesota. So she's speaking from that experience in addition to other experience.
And from my own.
Yeah.
I am obese and I have diabetes. And you know, I felt right at home. And I feel right at home on most every reservation. You know, because I'm not being as discriminated against as in other places because of it. And it's a sad fact.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it connects back to mental health and wellness too. More in addition to exactly what our elders saying there, physical health, but young families and children going out on the water to fish, families that are hunting together, families that are picking fiddleheads and onions in the spring together, boiling syrup together. There's a goodness, minimumata ziwan, that good life that rises up off of that phenological calendar offering of foods, and that you're getting better old traditional foods that are better for your body. You're doing it in a way that lights up family and connectivities, and so there's really there's a secret key there that we're trying to put back together and then use to unlock good lives for our people.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much. I think that the number of topics covered in this panel was just amazing, and I appreciate all of you for making the time.